Hello and welcome into the SorareData NBA show. I am Andrew Laird. You can find me as Lairdino on Sorare. Joined today by a very special guest who I've been trying to get on for a few weeks. It has finally happened now that the holidays have settled down a little bit. Somebody that is familiar with Mike Zakarian, who was on, I think, earlier this week. I can't even remember. But comes from the Top Shot world, hence the name TST, which we're going to try to work on a little bit here because Sorare is taking over. TST, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks for having me. It's been looking forward to finally nailing down a time to do this. So it's nice to finally talk some Sorare with you.
We're here. Yeah. So talking about Sorare is actually why we're here. It was funny. Just like a few minutes ago, I apologized to you for not sending you like a topic list or anything because I was like, we're just going to talk about Sorare, and it seems easy enough to just do that. But like you do this, like you talk about Sorare a lot because you have your own YouTube channel, which is linked in the description if everybody's watching on YouTube now. If you are, please hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't. But you do a lot of you do game week previews where you touch on different players and different L10 tiers and whatnot. And it seems like you've just really gotten into it. And you obviously did like a ton of Top Shot content when you were like deep into Top Shot as well. And so how have you found like the beginning of Sorare NBA, both like the game itself and kind of the content side of it?
So I'll start with the game itself. Like I came to Top Shot from like a huge basketball fan. So for me, like it's just another progression of that. Like that's where I all started from. And, I play, I have my fantasy basketball league. I messed around with DFS a little bit, but like I found it too time consuming from a day-to-day perspective. And it's funny. Like I'd messed around on Sorare on the free aspects of both the football and the MLB. Once MLB came out, I signed up for both and started playing just on the free side, but I'm not following all the leagues enough to really dive into the football. I got really into the World Cup one, obviously. MLB, I just played around. I was looking at it. I didn't really dive into the paid aspect. And then when basketball came through, I knew that I was going to, because it is like what I follow already. And I just don't have enough time to add more sports to everything when it comes to that. So, from the game aspect, I look forward to it. And actually I talked to some people that had done some like Web3 fantasy football stuff. And I had actually talked to them and I was like, someone needs to do a week-long like best ball NBA, like a weekly thing, because the injuries from day to day and all that stuff is like harder to keep up with. Someone should do it. And then, like, I don't know, 2-3 months later, I find out from Sorare that it's going to be like this half game and it's your best game and everything. So all those things kind of clicked for what I already kind of wanted from a DFS perspective, because I think it's like, it requires quite a bit of engagement, but not to the same level of DFS, which is just like not possible. And, like up to the wire, like the live before lock show, which I do on Mondays with Mike Zakarian over on Team Hold, like that's so much fun, but I can't imagine like that stress every day.
Yeah.
So that's where it's like fit nicely so far with me. And then from a content perspective, I've really loved it because it has a schedule. And that's why, like I've done a lot more Sorare content, is because I know that I can put out my preview video every Tuesday and Saturday or Wednesday and Sunday or whatever. But I know that like I have a topic, I know what it's going to be. And it's like, I get to dive into things that I'm already going to be looking at for personally, and then I can make content around it, versus my time creating content. And I still do from time to time with Top Shot. It's like, okay, boom, something got thrown at us. And it's like, if you have time right now to dive into this and make content, it'll be like topical for 2-3 days. But if you miss that window, then it's kind of not worth it to make content about it. So from a content perspective, I found this extremely refreshing. And it's like, it's so connected to basketball, right? So it's like connected to following along the games, following along the league, which I've done for, I don't know, 20 years or more, like pretty in-depthly. I had some time where I was following a lot more college basketball, but I've pretty much gone more into the NBA as of late. So it's been refreshing from a content perspective.
Yeah, for sure. The DFS basketball thing was always funny to me because like it took me about a week of playing to just be like, I can't do this every day. And the funny thing is you don't have to do it every day. Like if you just wanted to play DFS every like Wednesday, like you could, but like you do all the work one day and it's over that day. Like there's nothing that you're doing that day that helps you beyond the next 3 hours. And yeah, that like totally burned me out. And I had like stopped following the NBA, and Sorare like just totally brought me back in because while I appreciate the like hour before lock on Monday and Friday is like everything can change, but at the same time, there's still a way to play if you don't want to react to that kind of news, if that makes sense. One of the things that you had mentioned on Shot Tank this week, excuse me. If anybody doesn't watch Shot Tank, is it every Wednesdays? Like
It's
you guys
it's every Wednesday, usually 9 p.m. Eastern, and it floats between my channel, Team Hold, and actually Jeb Bush.
Right.
But if you're following any of us on Twitter or whatnot, we're always tweeting out wherever it is. But yeah, it's usually every Wednesday, 9 p.m.
So I was a late comer to the show, and it's like now one of my new favorite things. Like on Wednesday night, it was like after dinner, I was like talking to my wife. I'm like, oh, by the way, I'm like watching something at 9. So like we usually like sit down and like watch TV, and I'm like, I just gonna watch this thing on my computer. And she was like, what is it? And I'm like, it's just like a basketball thing. Like, don't worry about it. And I was like, I don't even know how far I wanted to go with it. But if anybody doesn't watch it, I highly recommend it. The live, I prefer it live just because, you get the chat going, and just like everyone who's joining us here, it's great. Mike Bath is saying, what time is that in Europe? So what is that? 6 hours at 3 o'clock in the morning. So you can either, you're in 3 o'clock in the UK. No, excuse me. 2 o'clock UK. Yeah. So either stay up late or wake up early, whatever you want, Mike. But the replays are always great too. But yeah, so one of the things that you had mentioned, where was I going with that? Oh yeah. And it was something that we had talked about on the SorareData strategy show a few weeks ago, of whether you can play this game kind of casually. And you would mention that when you started, you were playing more contender because you were like, you can really like dive in and research everything, but you've actually found champion to be like more interesting lately. What like changed for you that you think the champion is better? I say this as somebody who is adamant about playing champion without like Doncic and Jokic and anyone else who's actually good. And so I don't win that much, but so what is it about champion that you find better than contender now?
So a couple things happened, and it had more to do, excuse me, had more to do with like what my gallery started to look like and like my East situation and all that. So early on, I knew I was buying too expensive, but I wanted to play early. And sure. I knew it and I think I said it in some videos too, like maybe my first getting started and everything video and everything. I was like, I know that I'm overpaying right now, but I'm overpaying as I look at it as like to enter into these contests. And these are players that I'm going to use for a long time. I didn't really go after specific players with low caps or anything like that. I wasn't like buying the top based on the caps. I was just buying the top based on supply. And I knew that. And then I got like too into the auctions a little bit, where I was just like, they were very addictive, and they were just like, I'd be focusing on one player and then another player would pop up and I'm like, oh, he's only that right now. And like, it just like kind of tumbled. So like, I ended up with like not like a crazy amount of ETH left. So the reason I was attracted to contender is that it was like it's a lot easier to compete if we just look at it from a week to week perspective. If we just take this week, if you're starting from scratch, what is it easier to compete in? It's way easier to cash in contender, especially on a lower budget.
Yeah.
But the problem with contender is like, if you pick players that do well in your contender lineup and they continue to do well in your contender lineup, then they're not going to work for your contender lineup because their cap's going to go up.
Yep.
So basically that happened a little bit in my collection. And then there was just a point where I kind of like looked at some players and I was like, I'm going to buy some players that are producing well, but I'm not going to look at their caps at all. I'm going to look at them strictly on how much they produce and their cost. So that's where I went, like picked up like a Kevin Durant limited, a Shea limited, and they were players that weren't popping in the projections. They weren't. So I was really like looking at a season, and I also like started to dive around in the rare. And this was when rare and limited was mixed, or when rare was mixed with limited. So that's where I was like, oh, my Shea and Kevin Durant I can use over there as well as in limited champion. And then basically what happened is I was pretty comfortable with where my gallery was, and I was just trying to play with what I had and what I was winning. And I was cashing quite a bit in the contender. Then I cashed a couple times in the champion. Nothing crazy in the limited side of things, but it just allowed me to kind of play with what I had. But when you're playing with what you had, you're going to eventually start to veer towards champion because of the cap room, basically.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like where I've moved to. It's like, how often do you want it? If you're going to be super active in the marketplace, buying and selling and trying to like get off of players before their cap gets too high, finding the next new low one, then contender, you're probably going to do a little better in, just because of the number of rewards, right? We have like twice as many rewards in those. Yes, they aren't as good, but for the most part, people aren't cashing rares in the champion, right? Like most people aren't. Like,
sure. Yeah.
So it's better to kind of ensure those rewards over there. But if you're going to be more casual, which I think most people are, then it's really like you want your champion, you want those players that are hovering between 25 and 35. And then you want like your guys that you're going to choose for your MVP. And then you're kind of like working with what you got there. So that's really kind of like where my transition has gone. I still play them both, but I've noticed too that like I'm not one that really on like lock day is going to go out and buy someone that's like really popping in projections from a low cap standpoint. I'm just not active enough, I think, like on the computer when those like the news breaks and stuff. Like I'm doing the show with Mike, but like I think Mike talked about it here too, is like that's like the worst thing you can do from a personal like standpoint, is because like you're mentioning stuff, but like you're not on the side like buying stuff as well. So like I have a lot of fun doing that and like sharing that information and everything, but like for the most part, I'm not locked into my computer as much. My job is not one where like I'm at a computer all day. Like sure. I'm a teacher. So like it's like after school, I can like dive into this stuff. So it's not one where I can just be like, oh, some injury news broke and I just saw it on Twitter and now I can go like figure it out live, which is what you really have to be doing, or you're just going to be buying the top of one of those spikes that you see on SorareData.
So I like early on was like, I'm going to stay on top of it and all the news. And I was like buying guys that were like just that, like guys who were popping late. And I ended up with like multiple cards of guys that I was like, in any normal circumstance, I would never buy these guys. Like they're not going to be that good. I'm going to end up holding a bag here because he's good for this one game, but then he's going to be dead the next. You know, it was usually like a rest situation. And I'm like, so he's really just going to go back to being terrible. And then I start doing that thing where you have bad players and you're like, or guys are playing badly and you're like, oh, well, at least they're getting their L10 down. Like you just try to like justify your terrible purchases.
Yeah.
And I was like, I made a decision. I was like, I'm not going to do this anymore. I think the one that finally got me was Nikola Jovic, where I bought a rare and a limited. And I was like, I got them early and then they spiked. And I was like, well, no, I bought them to play them. And then I play them. He had like 8 points and it crashed back down. And I was like, oh, clearly like the move here is to flip them. So I was like, I'm not going to do this anymore. And then yesterday I see the Embiid news, and it's actually something Mike has been talking about recently, that his whole like Paul Reed thing from this past week. Embiid's going to go play Paul Reed. And you're like, no, you get Montrezl Harrell. Like that's who, don't get Paul Reed.
I played Harrell for the record.
Right. Yeah, you did. And so I was like, this is only like going to be a one game thing. Like Embiid is not like injured. He's just a little banged up. They're giving him a night off. But then it comes out yesterday that he's going to miss Friday's game. And what do? I go on the market and I snap buy 2 Montrezl Harrell limited cards. And now I'm like, this is exactly what I was like, I don't want to do. However, I'm now justifying it by being like, well, anytime Embiid is out, Harrell should play. And Harrell's kind of like the ideal guy because he plays normally. So his L10 is going to usually stay low, even if he has like, so if he pops off like he did, what do you have? 30 something? 40? Do you hit 40?
Yeah. I have him as a rare. So I had won him as a rare. So like that,
Wow.
this is an instance where like, okay, like my rare reward, it was a T4 for sure. Maybe, yeah, it would have been a T4. So it's like, okay, you're like, oh, that's not that great. But like just having him in my collection made me play him, right? I wasn't like big braining and being like, Montrez, like I'm gonna
Take the
go. I'm
credit,
like,
man. Come on.
no, but I was like, hey, Embiid might not play.
Yeah.
I could like I need to fit someone low cap. I don't have that many options. Montrez, you're in. And he had been like playing too. And that's the thing with him is like he was at least getting me something, right?
Yeah.
Versus some of my other low cap ones where it's just like you're just hoping for a blowout, maybe, or someone sits that you don't know. So I think that's also an instance where it's like you can kind of like you playing to what you already have can luck you into some things. And part of the reason goes back to what we were talking about earlier in that like that the lock is not day to day. Like you can luck into something later in the game week that you wouldn't necessarily. Same thing is like when a player's like, oh, they're resting him on the first day of the back to back on Friday. Well, he's going to play the other game. So you can also like the Friday and Monday news is like, it's the most we know, but like it doesn't mean it's the end all be all for these players that have multiple games. So I think it's like another aspect of like you playing towards your own collection. And like, I don't think people should necessarily be playing completely blind and definitely should be trying to look at like some different things that are going on. But when it's that one piece and it's like the difference between like going to spend some more, just like, hey, what do I have? And try to fit it first. And then maybe looking second to be like, oh, I'm actually going to go, pick something up here because it plugs a nice hole for this week. But like, similarly to kind of like what you were saying is like, oh, you would always play him. Like I bought a Moses Moody in one of those days where, where early on when Golden State was resting one player, they rest their whole team.
The whole team, yeah.
And I think it was the second time and we had heard news that like maybe like 2 or 3 of them were already resting. And then like we got the news a little later. So I bought him like pretty inflated, but like the price I bought him for then is essentially the same price that he is now because Steph's injured. Andrew Wiggins has been sick for like 3 months now. And he's won me a couple of rewards. So like, I'm interested to see like at what point during the season, like you will become like holding some bags in that situation. But early on, like for the most part, there is going to be some path to those players kind of popping off again and being valuable to play or maybe a chance to get off them.
Yeah, so I have 2 Jonathan Kuminga limiteds for that exact time frame of just like, oh, everyone is out. And I think the Warriors situation was kind of weird because everyone was out. And so you tend not to get such a drastic change in lineups. I guess it actually does feel like we're seeing it more lately. I feel like the Lakers do it. And I feel like we always think the Clippers do it, but then one of like Kawhi or Paul George is there, but I don't know. Somebody who has John Wall, it just feels like those guys play all the time now. But it's a good point though, that like what I'm starting to, or what I'm like have finally gotten to get myself to do is not sell rewards. I want to say like until they moon, because like I have guys that I've won that I'm just like, I would never buy these cards, but they do become like useful at some point. Like I won Conchar, I won John Wall, and like these guys are like, they fit in spots. I won a Lou Dort, and it's like that actually turned out to be really good. But like at the time, like everybody was healthy, and so he just wasn't playing as much as he is now. And so I think if you're somebody who doesn't need to get out of cards, like they've done a really good job of making sure that we just get as many as we possibly can.
Yeah.
And the more cards you have, like the less work you have to do before the deadline. And I really like what you said before of just like the news before the deadline is the most news that we know, but it's not all of it. And so, and like, obviously we don't know what's going to happen Tuesday for the Monday lock, meaning news during the day. So yeah, I like that a lot. Are you playing rare, or excuse me. So the move to champion, I think it's kind of like that's the progression I think Sorare wants us to have, is like you get contender, and then either those guys get really good and they don't fit anymore, or you like win something really good. Like you can win like the best limited cards in contender. So that
Mm-hmm.
helps you move up. But there is this weird middle ground where like of guys who are good enough, who are now their L10 is too high realistically for contender, but they're also like not really good enough for champion. So that's when these like cheat code cards come in, because it like makes those types of players easier to fit in. And this is something we talked about on another show, but like when you see whoever, like the Jackson Hayes, when he had an L10 of like 8, when like all of a sudden Zion is out and like he's going to play more. Do you think that guy is better in contender or champion?
Oof. That, like, those type of questions are so based on your gallery, I think.
Mm-hmm.
If we were to if we were to like if we were to look at, like, say you had options of like pretty much every card, then I would say it's probably more valuable in contender from a perspective of, I want to cash like decently. I want to like at least get something for it this
Yeah.
week. Like I'm aiming for like at least a tier 2 limited or something. Then I would say it's probably contender. If we're looking at like I'm trying to pick up I'm trying to like win a contest, then I would say it's more in champion. But it'll come back to like which lineup is it like optimal for you. And I think it's like probably important for people to look at that each week. It's like not necessarily be like, I'm only focusing on this one. Like I do think like you should have one that you're like, I'm focusing on this one. I start to build it first.
Yeah.
But then when I look at the other one, it is like definitely something different. It's just like you need in champion, you need like everyone to do like well. Whereas in limited, you can have like one guy go off and a couple guys be average, and you're still going to cash. Like obviously to win in either of them, you need everyone to go nuts. In the
Yeah.
champion, you need the like whoever's scoring 60 points these days and like getting 100 Sorare points. But if we're just talking like to get a nice placement every week, it's like you need more to go well in champion. That being said, like usually in contender, you're taking more risk from a like playing time, from like all that type of stuff. So they like balance out in a way. So that's like a long-winded way of saying you need to do it based on like who are you fitting in? It's really that. It's like who are you managing to fit in? Because in your champion, you might be fitting in like a second MVP level player.
Yeah.
Which could be, if they both go off, is the cheat code for that week. If it's limited, you might be like fitting in like a second tier MVP, like those people that are like in that 45 range of cap, which is really good in limited if they go off and the other one can contribute. But I also found it interesting. I don't know how many episodes it was ago, two or three ago, on your show, where you guys were looking at the like punting in contender, and like that's super interesting to me, because I just yesterday picked up a Jokic limited. So I'm like, yeah. So I was like, okay. I was like, basically, I remembered that I'd transferred some ETH to USDC. And it wasn't showing up, like it doesn't show up in my MetaMask. So then when I like realized that, I was like, oh my God, I forgot that I had that. So I was like, I could deposit that into Sorare. So I did that. And then I was debating, and I'm like, okay, should I start trying to play rare champion? Because I basically, since the switch, has just focused on rare contender.
Yeah.
Because I don't have one of the big guns. I don't have enough to focus on either as well. So like, or on both, sorry. So I chose contender for now. So I was like, I was debating the Tatum rare and like kind of like roll with that. But then I was like, maybe I'll like go with it. And then I was looking at Jokic and comparing him to like Luka right now. And I think like Luka's just overhyped from a price standpoint. Like I think they're both like probably like Jokic hasn't taken his turn to put up like something insane in a little while. He's just kind of been consistently Jokic. So I feel like he's probably a little slightly undervalued, and then Luka's a little overvalued right now just from a price standpoint. So I was like, like I'll take Jokic, and like I have my MVP every week basically. And I'm like no longer deciding between Kevin Durant, Shea, and Paul George. Like it's like I'm going to pick him like 90% of the time. So like that perspective has like kind of like changed what to do from like where I'm going with things. I forget how I got on that little tangent there, but
Well, I'm gonna.
oh, it was the punting. So
Oh yeah,
so now I have like a Kevin Durant, I have a Shea, I have Julius Randle who has caps at like 49 now.
yeah.
I have Paul George, and like two of those were rewards. The last two were rewards, and the first two I bought when I was like first getting into MVP of the rare and MVP of the limited. So now I'm really like thinking like, okay, like do I sell these and then like reinvest that in some rare stuff maybe? Do I choose like one of them to keep in case I don't want to use it in Jokic? Do I just keep them and kind of like see like some of their caps sometimes dip into the low 40s if they have a couple like off weeks? And then I was like, or do I start trying this like punting thing over in the limited contender? So I found that discussion very interesting and not something that like, I think I tried that in one of the first weeks for like a common one when like I think I had a -2 guy or something. I was like, hey, I'm gonna toss that into like common contender and just see how like this kind of works out. But definitely like it has me thinking of holding on to one or two of these guys that I might consider selling just to like try to roll that out. I think you guys saw like had an extreme example of like one of them winning or something, but like I think that it'd be more like, could I get like a tier 3 reward by doing this like every now and then?
So I had like almost the exact same path when it came to champion limited, where I was trying to basically get by with MVPs of like Durant or Harden or Lillard. And it's just like super frustrating to play those guys and they score like 60 and you're like, that's pretty good. And then you see Doncic drop 97 and Jokic 89 and Giannis 85. And you're just like, I'm so far behind because I don't have one of those guys. So I had Steph and the injury, like, but even Steph isn't on that level. Like, in order for Steph to reach the Doncic, Jokic, Giannis, and maybe Embiid like scores, like he has to score 50, like
50 and 10 threes.
Right. Which like he's capable of doing, but like those guys are averaging those types of games, and so it's just kind of like I was just falling short, and so I bought Giannis like earlier this week, which is why he's like gimpy now, but so I was going from like contender was my first lineup, and now I'm like, well, I have Giannis, and so that champion is the first lineup I'm building now because like I want to make my best card have the best players around him. And the punting thing is really like I think of it more for champion because I'm like, can I get by with like Giannis, Harden, Lillard, then like a Chris Paul, although the Suns have been so bad. Actually, I have DeJounte Murray, who I keep like jamming into lineups, and he's like, and then some zero, who's just like, I know it's going to be zero. And I think it's like, I think that's bad strategy. I'm going to say it right now. Like the scores you need are just so much higher in champion. I was complaining to somebody earlier today that my champion lineup scored 245 points this week and I didn't win anything, like nothing. And I'm just like, that's crazy. Like I haven't, it was my non Giannis. Like I bought Giannis right after the Monday deadline. So like this weekend I will finally do it. But like the scores are just absurd there. But for like contender, it's just like wild to see that like to win contender, like you could be under 200. And yet like 250 is like just getting to the tier 5 in champion. And so the punt, like I'm not willing to try the punt where it is, like with Giannis, but I will definitely try it with contender just to like see. Like that's like one of my favorite things about Sorare, that like we buy the cards, but I mean, I'm trying right now and I'm not winning anything. So if I want to try something else and I don't win anything, like I'm all right with that. But I do wonder how many people are looking at these like complete outlier scores and deciding like that's like, you're like, no, you can get by with a 0 as long as you have the Donovan Mitchell 100 and the the Jokic 85 and the Halliburton 70. Like, yeah, it's easy. Like, just get that.
Just pick who's going to go off. Like the three guys are going to go off. They're all taking turns, it seems, in the league. I do wonder if we are a little like blinded by the last like 2 weeks in the NBA. Like, are we too worried about like that aspect? Like, are people like making decisions based on like unsustainable performances in the NBA? Like, I mean, there's some like crazy data this year, don't get me wrong, of like offensive ratings and like the amount of like over 40-point games and 50-point games and all this. We had a 70. All these things are like crazy, but it's just like those aren't necessarily the normal. They have been for like the last 3 game weeks. But like if you go back a little further in the like, I think game week 20 was like the Luka week, which made it crazy. And then like before that, like there was like week 18 that was like quite high. So we've had some, but like for the most part, like these aren't like the norm just yet. Like, hey, maybe it is. Like maybe we're going to have one of these guys, but we've also seen it rotating. So like it had like, yes, Luka's put up a couple of the huge ones, but like, remember, like, I don't know, it was pretty early in the year when Embiid went for 100.
Yep.
And like, then no one touched that, like touched 80 for like several weeks, you know? So like, and we kind of like, at that point, people weren't being like, oh my God, like you need to like have 3 of those guys that are all going to go for like 70 plus. So it'll be interesting to see like, is this kind of just like an anomaly in the season kind of, or, you know, are people just going to be putting up 80s to 100s all the week? The other thing is that I find interesting when it comes to who pops off really changes like which contest is affected mostly.
Yep.
So when it is a Giannis, a Luka, or whatnot, the champion is mostly. But like when we had Donovan Mitchell go off, like people could have squeezed it. He was like at a 43, so he probably affected both. But then Clay like saw like contender really get affected by that. For like I usually kind of use limited champion and contender as like the gauge of like the general thing, just because it's where most people paid are playing. And then the numbers are just way too different from participants to compare common to limited, because we just have all that variance. But like if we looked at like limited champion, first place like this week was 333. And then like, or sorry, limited champion was 333. When it was Luka that went off, it was 356. And I think these numbers would have been a lot different if Tatum didn't go off too, right? He put up like 75 on the last day. Whereas if we look at like contender, it was all the way at like 248 this week to win it. So I think, you know, Schroeder put up like a massive game at a cap of 18. So I think that's interesting to kind of look at too, is like which contest will be more affected. Whereas like contender will be less touched when it's a Luka is the only one that goes off, a Giannis is the only one that goes off. And so that goes back to like the thing where I think a lot of people kind of are feeling, especially as of late, is like, if I don't have Luka, Jokic, you know, Embiid, Tatum, like that top tier, it's like I have no business in champion. And like, I don't think that's completely true. I think it is like you'll have a more difficult time consistently hitting. But like second tier of MVP, those guys go off for just as many points. They just do it less often. And they don't hit those like Luka, Jokic, and them. They can pretty much just pencil them in for like 50 on a bad day. And that's like means you can work with that on a bad day. Whereas the other ones, when it's a bad day, it's like 30, and then you're like pretty much screwed if that's your MVP.
Yeah, I was looking at that yesterday because my rare champion team is not good enough. Like Dame Lillard is my best rare. And the only reason I have that card is because I remember one night, like the auctions were glitching and like they weren't loading enough. And somehow I got a bid in on Lillard. Like I own the cheapest rare Lillard ever sold. Still wasn't even that cheap, but it was a fluke. Like I shouldn't have gotten this card. And so I've been trying to like compete in rare champion with Lillard as my best player. And it's like when he goes off, it's like 70 points, which is like really close to just the average that we were seeing, that we do see from like Doncic and Jokic, and like AD was doing that pretty regularly.
Yeah.
And so he's like a really good second guy, but like the really good rare MVPs that you want are like 3 to 4 times the price of Lillard. And already Lillard was like more. So like I'm not going to be able to play in champion rare. But like when you get to limited, and this is something that I've like talked about numerous times, but like you were talking about, like when Doncic goes off, like limited champion is really affected. Just why we need other places for him to go. And this U23 this week, I hope everybody puts there, because like I'm sick of having to figure out what's going to happen there. But I was looking, like when you look at guys who like pop off that affect contender, it's like we almost don't even notice them because they're not the guys who score 80. It's like guys who had an L10 of 20 and they scored 50, which, and like 50 is not really enough for champion. Like I'm looking at the impact players from this like past game week, and like Draymond Green was the most popular player in limited contender, but he dropped 50. So like that's 360 lineups had him. So like that's a lot. Kevin Love was second. He had 37. So like if those guys go off, like that's going to be affected in contender, but you can probably make it up because it's just not such a huge gap as opposed to when Doncic drops 100.
Yeah. And the other thing is that in champion, when Doncic drops 100, like that person, it costs him 0 cap, right? Like in contender, like that Draymond was what, like high 20s, low 30s, maybe?
He was 23, I think. He's 23 now.
Oh, because of his ejection games. They finally
super helpful.
L10. Yeah, super helpful for Draymond. So even that, like, right, like it still cost him 23, which is like technically an above average cap player in limited, right? Like you have an average of 22. So like that still cost them a lot of their cap, right? Like it cost them a fifth of their cap. Whereas when Luka goes off, it costs them 0. So
do you think it's weird that the caps are different?
Yes. I've always, and the reason I think it's weird is that like it's different in the way you would think it would be opposite, right? Like if contender was 120 and champion was 110, you'd be like, well, yeah, you got a free player, right? Like you have a free one. So like that has never made sense. Like have you ever heard an explanation for that?
No.
Okay.
And like I remember like when it came out, like right away, I was like, oh, it seems weird that you just make it different. Like I don't think contender drastically changes if they just make it 120.
And I would feel like it would though when I'm setting my lineups. But I agree. Yeah. It wouldn't become like easier to win, or everyone has the same. Everyone's dealing with the same thing, but
So
some weeks would help me.
Yeah, I make the joke every game week that like if I had a cap of 111, I would be able to make lineups a lot easier. But somehow the 110, so maybe they nailed it because it makes me just have to go buy more bad low L10 guys. But yeah, just from like a ease of understanding, like, yep, 120, but this one you get a free player. It's like, okay, great. I don't know. But you guys talked about Underdog also on Shot Tag. It was actually about all of the different competitions. And actually, let me start with Underdog, but I have a follow-up question to that, which I will definitely forget. But if I remember correctly, you were on the side that Underdog sucks.
Yes.
Okay. As was I. So I guess we're not going to argue here. But maybe you guys didn't really go into like why you specifically didn't like it. But what got me to be kind of like, I don't want to do this, is it felt like they were creating a tournament for guys that really should have no value. And I understand like wanting to create something that like everybody has value, but like I was buying guys, or I was looking to buy guys, which I didn't, thankfully, that I was like, all right, I'm going to play an Underdog this week. And then now I have these guys that have L10s of like 6 that I'm never going to use again until the next Underdog rolls around. And I just like buying players that you're like, I hope he gets 8 minutes is not fun.
Yeah. So I agree mostly there. The one thing where you're saying like it's creating, like I could see it from a perspective of like we're trying to create value for tier 5 rewards.
Yeah.
But like from that perspective only, the like I also was approaching that question when we were discussing that on Wednesday from a like, okay, we got to pick one to stick around. Like I have no problem with underdog being rotated in and out, but like you have been adamant about, it's like we need more contests that like we can divide up the players or whatnot, and just like more use for our cards, etc. I know like you've played the soccer one for a long time, and there's like contests all over the place there,
Yeah.
different ones and everything. So like I just think underdog is the bottom of the list. I don't hate it when it comes around necessarily, but whenever I look at the other ones, I also think the no cap one sucks. Like the no cap one is like for people like, and that's like, I think where a lot of like soccer people were like came from too, right? Originally there was no caps over there. And it's like,
Yeah.
okay, you buy your 5 guys and you can roll them out every week. And like, that's my team. But it's like, okay, like, am I really like going to be able to compete? Like, and they needed more contests that had different restrictions that weren't specific to like the quality of player, but more so like them qualifying based on the league they're in, qualifying on their age, etc. So like I'm of the like notion that they're just experimenting probably all season long, and it's so that they can like make a decision of something that's going to stick around for the long run. But like the no cap and underdog by far to me have been like the worst ones. I think Eastern Conference and Western Conference are probably the most underrated. It was the first ones they came out with, and like it's essentially the game. Like it's the same, right? Like it's just like, oh, but not so it's like more to your point, it's going to divide out those players. I'm interested to see the under 23 and the veteran kind of like play out. But again, then you have like that middle range that aren't fitting there, but like you are splitting, and how the league is functioning, that U23, you can put together like a pretty nice lineup pretty easily, because just the talent is ridiculous in the NBA right now. But like, I think they're trying things out. I would just like, I wonder, like from a personal standpoint, I don't look at really the data of those contests that much, because I think anyone who's looking at this would never prioritize that based on the level of rewards. And it's like not even close to like comparative to the like participants. So I'm wondering if like their collection of data, like what exactly would be based on, from a like, is it popular? Is it creating sales? Like I'm sure there's so many levels to it, and maybe a lot of it is just like feedback. Are people enjoying it or not? But like, I think if we had just a more balanced, I'm not saying equally balanced rewards given out in those, we might see like some more like splitting, like, you know, like you're saying, you're hoping Luka goes over there, but like for the most part, like unless you're like unless you have like the top U23 team, like if like you just like, you're not like you're not putting someone in there because he's U23, you would put him in, like that would be your lineup over in like champion pretty much. Right. But now you're just going to shift him over there. Then maybe you can make an argument that you're playing against less people and less options and etc. But if you're kind of fitting in your team and you're just like, oh, I have like 8 guys that are U23, let me put them over here, like you probably shouldn't throw Luka in with them. You should have them over there.
No, definitely put them in U23, please. No, no, I completely agree with all of that. I do find it weird that they're offering more tier 1s there. I guess that's the easiest way that you get people to play if you're not going to offer the same number of rewards or even remotely close. Like limited champion has 1,000. So like limited champion has 1,000 limited cards available, but you actually can't win any tier 1s there, tier 1 limiteds. It was always strange to me that like you can't win the best limiteds with the best limiteds. So like you're never going to use Doncic to win Giannis, but I guess you could do it in the U23. I don't know if they've said that the prize pool is also U23 players.
That'd be wild.
Well, so that's what they do in football.
Do they? If you click on
yeah,
it, just
look
goes.
Like
it just goes to the generic one.
Yeah.
That is for all of them. So like you see Dame Lillard there right away.
Do you think that would make people play it more if they knew they were winning a U23 player?
If it was there all the time, yeah.
Yeah.
But if it's just going away, like, right, like when's the next time we see U20? Like we might see it another week, and then we might not see it again for like 3 months, unless or ever this season. So it's
that's like one of those things that I struggle with, because like I know why they do it. Like they're trying things out, but like underdog's a bad example, but like even if you did like buy players for underdog, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, all right, we'll do this again in 3 months. You can come back then, and by then, hopefully your guy went from an L3 to L10 of 3 to 13. But like,
Yeah.
but it just like changing it too much makes it difficult to like plan. And maybe this is just too much of thinking from football because like those contests don't change that much. Or if they do, we have like, we know what the contests are for the next 4 weeks. And so like that's enough time to like figure everything out. But the like U23 makes total sense to just keep. And I think based on how they set it up, meaning like the few rewards, good tier ones, don't get me wrong there, but like I just don't know how much data you're really getting out of this if it's like a contest that everyone's like, oh yeah, I'll just like throw my extras in. Whereas like what they should be doing are like trying to create contests like people want to play. And like we want to play this because it's like, oh cool, it's another place to like put cards. But like you're not going to go out of your way to like make sure that the players you buy now are under 23 just in case there's a U23 contest in a month. But like if we knew it was always there, I guess theoretically we see exactly what we see in football, that like those players get more expensive because it's like there are more places you can play them.
But I mean, it's just like Borland saying here, like U23 is throwaway contest and there's only 100 total prizes, which like that's kind of how all these side contests have been for me at least. And I think most people, and like, that's fine if like what they're trying to get out of it is just more like a kind of word of mouth type of like response to this. Like what is like something that people enjoyed the most versus like, okay, did this cause, people to go buy, did this, but like, I don't know if that's the right approach either. And maybe like they're doing it this way first and then they'll like whittle it down to like, okay, we're trying to choose like what's going to stay or not. And then they'll have like a more maybe full data approach in which they make the prizes more appealing. But I don't know. I think any more contest is like one less training lineup to do. It's like, we can get a couple Lucas over there, whatnot. So I do think it's fun. I would like, I haven't done it. It just like kind of reminds me, I would like to go back and look at the week that had the no cap one and see if that had like an effect on the top, like the champion that week. Like, did we see a particularly low champion that week because the no cap could have pulled away like essentially all like a couple MVP levels? Like if someone was like, no, I'm going after this, like they didn't play any of them. So that would be kind of something interesting to look at from that perspective. But in the end, I think more contests, they have to be, they have to be careful by not giving out too many rewards too, right? Like that's part of their pacing is also the rewards.
Yeah. So I haven't checked the data on this, which is ironic coming from a guy who works at SorareData, but based on what we saw, certainly in baseball and the expectation from what comes out in football, there are more than enough rewards. Like, meaning like the supply is plenty big for them to like pump out rewards. Like we're beyond a third of the way through the season.
Yeah.
And like, I don't think any player is up to 1,000 limited cards. And so
this is actually a topic I wanted to talk to you about because I know you have more experience in Sorare's general. And I think MLB is really the only one we can really compare because the scarcities are just so different in soccer, right? Like your rares are at 100, your limiteds are at 1,000. So that's just hugely different, let alone the number of contests. But, there's so many more leagues and players and such. So there's like so many different factors there. Whereas like MLB to NBA is like more of a 1-to-1, but like if we think of, let's use Luka, Giannis, and Jokic as our example, right? If they were full supply, right, that'd be 15,000 of those three. If like, I think we're going to hit it pretty soon, but we're going to hit like 10,000 people playing in the limited contest. but like that essentially means that like everyone would have 1.5 on average of these players. And that just like means that the value of them would just be hit so hard. So like in MLB, do you find they did a good job of like stopping minting, or did they like continue selling all the way to the max mint? Like, are we gonna get 5,000 of these
So it's a
this year?
super loaded question.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
unfortunately, baseball gave us no indication for what to learn for NBA because baseball launched at the All-Star break.
Right.
So they announced right at the beginning that they were only going to mint a maximum of half of the supply because they launched mid-season and they were like, we're only going to go to 2,500 limited cards. Aaron Judge has 252 limited cards. Like they didn't,
and that's done, right? Like that's
it's not done, but like the auctions now, they're, let me see if I can pull this up. I actually looked at this the other day. I think, so we're used to like the NBA auctions where there's like a new one every 30-ish seconds, let's call it.
yeah.
Looks like it's at, is that 40 seconds now? It's a little further away. Actually, sorry, I'm like looking at minute 10. Oh, they're actually over a minute. Anyway, so baseball right now, and granted, and actually this probably answers a few like subsequent questions, but baseball right now is one every 45 minutes.
Okay.
Like their expectation right now is that like nobody's looking at baseball. So like they don't want to just have auctions going and cards going for like pennies. There are people interested in baseball. Like now, like I've talked to people who are like, I can't get baseball cards now because none are getting minted. So I was thinking about this because you guys talk about like supply a lot on Shot Tank. It's like something that you guys think about a lot. And like I feel like most people on Sorare don't actually think of it, like in terms of like how it affects value, because we so rarely get, that was a horrible pun. I didn't even mean to say that. We very rarely get full mints in football. Like even rares, there are 100 and very few get to 100. And they certainly don't reward as many as they say they can. So like this has been like a bone of contention with a lot of people with football, that the Sorare line is that they can reward up to 40% of the supply. And the basically gray area with that is it 40% of the total supply or is it 40% of each player? Like we do not get 40% of like the Lionel Messi supply as rewards. Like it's not remotely close. It's like 8%, 10%. And when you think of it from like Sorare side, like those are their most valuable cards. Like if they sell more, they'll make more. And so there's definitely like a faction of people who are like, you're not rewarding enough Messis because we're not getting to 40%. And the lines are like, well, it's up to 40%, but it's like just the way that they have rewarded. It's clear that it's like 40% of the available supply of all cards. And
but if you're of the opinion that it should be 40% of every card, wouldn't that necessarily like mean that you think that every tier should be given out in the same amount? Like if like I think they have tier 0 on, like Messi would be a tier 0, right?
yes.
So like then you're saying that there needs to be as many tier 0 rewards given out as there are tier 5.
Correct.
And like that doesn't make sense like from a just like how you would set up a contest.
Right.
So
From an actual just like real
like I
life
mean that
game.
would be like you'd feel pretty good about it, but like in the end like the value of those cards would that like so that's where I just like I'm like that would be a cool like that would be a very generous prize structure.
Right.
But like just thinking it, and I wouldn't have thought of that until you said there's people like unless you had described it to me that way. Like if they were just like 40%, would it be cards? I wouldn't have thought of it until like you pose it that way. But like that would be like my opinion is like so you like expect there to be as like that'd be like in NBA, like if we looked at the contender like and it's just divided up and you have like like 400 or 450, whatever it would be of tier 1, then 450 to 900 would be tier 2. And that's just like not how it's set up. It's like it gets flatter and flatter. And I assume the purpose of it getting flatter and flatter is so that you can give away more total rewards.
Yes, absolutely.
They have to make money in the end.
Right. And so this idea that like we're gonna have the same number of Luca rewards as we do Ryan Archidiacono, like it's just not gonna happen. So like so in terms of the supply, like we don't know about baseball because it launched, like I said, it launched mid-season. I don't think baseball was as successful as they would have hoped. I don't know what their internal expectations were. Like people were playing, but exactly what some people worried about with the off season happened, that like it basically is just dead. Like nobody is doing anything. And the interesting thing with the football side is that like, because football is global and there are leagues all over the place, like there's always stuff going on. And so when the European leagues end, people sell off and then they buy like the America and Liga MX and Japan and Korea cards because they're playing. And so it's just always moving. So we haven't had any situation where nothing is going on. And they've tried a few like these collector challenges or whatever. And it's like, I would call it like essentially a failure. Like it didn't get anybody to buy the cards and it didn't make anyone want to do anything. And so I have no idea what's going to happen in the NBA offseason. Like I assume that the auctions will slow to a crawl because so much of the Sorare market is based on utility, that like, I'm going to buy this card because I'm going to use it in this contest. And if there are no contests, then like, there's no point to buy cards. Like the number of people who I talked to before baseball ended that they were like, I'm just going to buy a bunch of cards in the offseason because they'll be cheap because nobody wants them. But like Sorare stopped selling them basically. And so now it's like, you couldn't do that. So keeps prices up because nobody's selling, then the price can't go down. But so Mike is also adding this too. Like they're basically auctioning shitty cards now for baseball. But anyway, so like we're not remotely close to the supply that they'll get to. Even the half supply that they told us that is the max they would do.
Yeah.
But NBA, just where it is, it's not even on pace to reach the full 5,000.
Which is comforting. For me personally, and just like and the reason I think we talk about it so much is just like, if all the rewards ever are cards, then like, and we hit these mint counts, like eventually the interest just like it just will collapse. Like if they are not very, very conscious of minting to their user base number, which like it's clearly an algorithm that they have and they're taking data points and everything. And the fact that it slows down, I think is like good. I understand like people will be frustrated and everything, but if we entered next season, like with, say, I don't know, even like 4,000 limited Lucas minted, and then we're starting off like, then there's another 5,000 coming. Like that's a lot of users you need to bring in. And like, if they're coming, that's great. It blows up and like it becomes super popular and we have like the amount of people that are in common or in limited. Yeah, then it'll be okay. But like their ability to increase auction rate kind of like factors in there that you won't get like a crazy squeeze going on. And I think we saw that happen at one point during the year, is that like we had the initial and then we had the like big dip, and part of the like big dip was that auction started like firing off like crazy. And I think it was like a lot of people maybe converted from common to limited and they saw like people like buying. So like, I mean, that's when like I got to pick up some of the cards that like some of my rare cards. Like I have a Paul George that like I picked up during that point just because it happened to like figure out time. I was like, okay, I'm going to go after rare contender, rare champion. And like those types of things, like so much depends on the auction rate. And then if we don't get any other rewards, and I found your discussion very interesting about the that you're talking about the ETH thresholds or the ETH prizes, and that like most people don't win them, like especially the prizes, right? Like most people don't come top 3 or whatever it is in different contests. But I think the part of it is like the ability to like the
Sure.
something like if you look at DFS and like most people probably are negative, like it is gambling, like most people lose, like, or like, you know, like not everyone hits that big contest or whatnot. And like, but it's that like, if I play this, I have a chance to. And right now, like, yeah, it's hit a big card, but if that big card doesn't have value or everyone already has that player, then that value is. And like, you look at a player, like, you know, we talk about under 23s being super valuable, but like, if that under 23 in 6 years is still like the best in the league, but he has, you know, 30,000 cards, then it's not going to be as valuable by then.
So you touch on something that has been a really popular conversation in football, that it's like fears that I think will actually are more realistically going to be realized in NBA than football. And basically the benefit that they have in football is there are just so many players, and there's so many players that they still don't even have licensed, that it's not an endless supply possibility, but it's effectively endless. So in NBA, your supply is NBA players, and they only reward cards from the current season. So as you were saying, like at the beginning of next season, we go in, let's say with 4,000 Lucas. Obviously, we don't hit all 5,000 like right away, thankfully.
Yeah.
But at some point, you're going to have, 3 years from now, let's just even say there are 10,000 Lucas. The reward pool is still only the current year's cards. So they can't go through a season and be like, oh, all right, we'll just reward 5,000 Lucas. Like, they can't do it.
Yeah.
And so they're going to run out of rewards. People have been saying they're going to run out of rewards for football for like 3 years, and it's not remotely close. And they're not remotely close right now in NBA. So it's like, I don't want to say it's one of these things that like win as much as you can now. Although that is something we say now, that like every single day that we go on, the more users, the harder it will get to win. But you are right that like at some point there are going to be 10,000 Lucas on the platform. And if there are 10,000 Lucas and still only 1,000 rewards, most of which are like tier 4s and 5s, like how fun of a game is that? Mm-hmm. That's not like a problem you and I have to solve, thankfully. But like, no, I think we'll see more like real life rewards.
Yeah.
Or even just like, one of the suggestions that people have are like just like skins for your gallery. Like they have those in football with like achievement points. Nobody ever uses them because they're kind of just worthless. But like if they kind of like add a sort of a gamified part of that, NFTs that you can't use in the game, there's always stuff they can do. Like they did it with the National Series cards for football. Like you can't use those in the game, but some people kind of like them and then they collect them, and those are rewards that are like basically free. So anyway, so I think you guys are right to think about supply. And I think the funny thing is that you guys all seem to have like a comfort in knowing what the max supply is, but then knowing that you're like, oh shit, they're going to run out of like things that they can do with these cards when there are so many users who want them. So in terms of the auctions, like I remember when, like you mentioned, it felt like the auctions were like every like 3 seconds, and it was just like they're pumping them out, and people were like really angry. Like I was like angry that like card prices were falling because they were just blasting these cards out. And my response, which like I understand why it pisses people off, my response is like their goal is to get users in, and the way you get users in is like offer as many cards as you can so that these people come in. And yes, it's gonna like push prices down temporarily. But like once those people are in, they start buying more cards, and it just kind of, that's how we grow a game. But it did feel really shitty, like buy cards early, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, that same card is 10% of what I paid. Yeah. ignoring the fact that I played the card for 6 weeks and I've won 6 rewards, and because nobody wants to think about rewards that way. Although I will say on your channel, you also did a video on the value of your rewards. So everybody go check that out as well.
Yeah. So that's one of my favorite parts about it, is that like you have to take that into account. And like
Nobody
even
does.
yeah, even like so I like mentioned at the very beginning, you know, I got obsessed with auctions and everything, and like it really like, you know, some of them I'm way down on. If I look at like the early point, there is if I factor in rewards, there's only 2 cards that I'm like that down on. And one of them is only $8. And the rest of that time period from rewards, as well as, you know, they've bounced back at different points. And the one that I'm down on is Paolo Banchero. And he was playing like crazy well at the beginning as a rookie. And he had the like rookie lure as well. I think some people more at the beginning, maybe a little less now, but I think it's still factored in a little bit. That little badge in the top corner,
cool.
being a rookie card, has a little inflated on the price based on their production, and just that, you know, they could become a superstar. So you might still be buying them at a decent price. Other than him, like everything else has like been okay because of like rewards. Those early cards, I've won like 5, 6, 7, 8 rewards with some of them. So that not being factored in to it. And like, I kind of like, if you're thinking of this as a DFS too, it's like what you pay for a card is like your entry fee, and you divide that out by every time you play them.
Yep.
So your entry fee at the end might be like $2 if you play them all year long. So that's kind of like that's how I looked at it early, or justified it early, because I wanted to play those early, but like I knew that I'd be spreading that out over the long term.
It's the right way to do it. Everybody who's paying attention, this is how you do it. Because, well, I mean, I've said it before, like if you bought a card for $100 and it's now worth 70, but it helped you win a card that was another $100, like, are you losing? It's like, everyone's like, well, yeah, it's worth $70 now. And it's like, you have this other thing that is worth more that like pays that off.
So I know, I think with Mike, you're talking about how like you guys track that for soccer and stuff, and it's coming to NBA eventually on SorareData. But I was wondering, and do you do this mentally? Would you count when you're thinking of things a reward back to the first card?
Yes.
So, and how do you divide that value up, or how would you divide that value up? Because you can't apply the same value to both the reward and the other one. So it goes back to the original.
Yeah. So that's like we've always called it like the snowball of like winning rewards with rewards. And I do believe that when we account for it, it goes back to the original card. And so there's basically like 2 ways that you could determine how much of a reward a card is worth. So like,
yes,
some people do it based on just like, I won this reward, it's worth 0.1. So I'm going to give 0.2 or 0.02 to everyone. The other way to do it is by score. So like if the player scored more, then he was actually more valuable in winning that reward, but it doesn't matter.
So where I'll push back there is, I think for NBA, it shouldn't be score, but it should be score above cap.
I like that. The
problem you'd come into is MVP.
Right.
Because then there would be, but if you're just looking at limited, it would be like scoring above cap. And like, I talked about this like briefly in the video. I was like, I just divided it by 5 because like doing all that from like manually is just like, I don't have that much time on my hands. But I kind of wanted that, but like that in itself is like a huge discussion and like too big of one here. But like, just like a simple counterpoint would be like, I might have put a guy in that had a cap of 5 and he only scored 7. So in either way, scoring only 7 or only 2 over your cap is not that great and shouldn't get attributed that much value. But the ability to put him in my lineup allowed me to play the other one. So like doing this is a whole mess. And like, that's why I think it was easy, is like divide them all by 5. And I did that. And like, it's not the best way. But finding the actual best way would be extremely difficult, in my opinion.
I think the only people who would be able to figure out the best way to do it are those who have claimed NFTs on all their taxes and figured out the cost basis of everything. And my guess is there are about 7 people on Earth who have done that. So
I've done most of mine, not gonna lie.
oh gosh, all right.
But I was thinking about Sorare, and I was like, started in December, like, like really making moves. I don't know about that one, but everything
Yeah,
else I had done before. So
yeah, that one's not easy.
no.
I'm gonna end this here because I said I would take up an hour of your time, and it's been about 70 minutes now. But we have like 5 things that we should follow up on. So I'd love to have you back at some point. Hopefully, it doesn't take as long to schedule for me to get my own schedule in order to give you an accurate schedule.
It was the holidays. We'll blame it on the holidays.
That's right. Yeah, perfect. I think I've mentioned everywhere where people can find you, but I did at the beginning. Let's do it again. If you could just tell everyone where you are.
Yeah, so you can check me out on YouTube at NBA Top Shot Talk. Maybe a little rebranding happening sometime in the future. On Twitter, I'm at NBA_TST. I put out some like daily recap stuff. I just put one out this morning on Twitter that, goes through like the different rewards, the averages over time. And then on YouTube, the main thing you're going to find is every game week, I do a preview looking at the different tiers. So over 30, 15 to 30 and under 15, who's projecting a little well at the start. I try to do that early, so it doesn't have all the injury news. But again, check out Team Hold live before lock. I'm there every Monday. I'm available. I'm there. And then he does it Friday with Gnome, who I think I saw in the chat maybe earlier. So shout out Gnome, but you can find me there. But Andrew, it's been absolute pleasure to finally do this. I really appreciate it because like just talking to someone with the experience in Sorare and just a different perspective is so much fun.
No, I'll say before I finally cut us off that you and Mike and the whole like Shot Tank conversations, like you guys look at Sorare, I think, the right way. And I think some of your experiences with Top Shot have given you guys perspectives that a lot of us who have been in Sorare don't really appreciate. And so like, I've really enjoyed hearing how you guys are viewing it and kind of your opinions. And then, makes me feel nice and important when you guys ask me questions. So it always feels good. So anyway, thank you everyone for joining us. If you guys haven't hit the like button, it looks like there are many more people watching than have liked the video. So help us out here. But yeah, thank you for that. And good luck.